I will. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It is now Wednesday, the 6th of September, and we're going to continue our Likutei Moharan journey. We're actually going to start today by actually wrapping up very briefly our lesson on Hitbodedut, lesson 52. So if you have so this is going to be a little complicated, but if you have your paper on lesson 52, I want you to look in the back and see if your sheet ends with something that says made with Sefaria source sheet. If it doesn't, then you need to have a copy that does. Okay. So if you look at the very, very last page of Likutei Moharan 52, not 10, right? The bigger one. We're going to get to 10 in a moment. But if you look at 52, okay, does your 52 have on the back? And if you don't have a 52, then here's the last one, okay, that we had. If you don't have that with you today, because there is something I want to wrap up about Likutei Moharan 52. So we'll get to Likutei Moharan 10 in a moment. But if you have 52, just make sure it ends with this, because then you'll have it all. Okay. So, Lila, I don't think you probably need it. I think, do you have the one? Oh, yes, you do. Okay, good. Okay, you do. Okay, so what I'd like everyone to do, because again, I want to wrap up this lesson, but there is something very interesting that I want to point out at the end of this lesson. So, we turn to the penultimate page, the next to the last page, right? And on the back, where we're going to pick up is where it says Likutei Moharan 52:5:1. Okay. So now we just went through that whole lesson, okay? This whole lesson on Likutei Moharan up to this point. Very complex lesson, right? You'll notice, right, that some of the verses were, very complex and hard to understand. We took 2 days just to skim over it, right? And to even just understand it on a cursory level, okay? And then here at the very end, where it says Likutei Moharan 52:5:1, you get this, right? You have Rabbi Nachman, who is compiling all of these lessons from Rabbi Nachman. You have, he says, here you have Lashon Rabbeinu, Zichrono Livracha, of this lesson, which he composed with extreme brevity. So now let's remember that when we began this journey, I said there are 3 types of lessons, quote unquote, in the Likutei Moharan. There are those that have the title Lishon Rabbeinu, right? And these were the lessons that Rabbi Nachman's disciple, his main disciple, right, took actually from his notebooks. So whenever you have a lesson that says Lishon Rabbeinu, that means these are the actual words of Rabbi Nachman that were written down in one of Rabbi Nachman's notebooks that Reb Nosson put into Likutei Moharan. Then you have the vast majority of the lessons that have no title at the top, which means that these were the lessons of Rabbi Nachman that Reb Nosson wrote himself as he was listening to the lessons of the rabbi, right? He wrote down the lesson and then put it into the Likutei Moharan. And then you have another superscription, right? The words of others, which means that it was one of Rabbi Nachman's disciples other than Rabbi Nosson who wrote down the lesson, because it was before Rabbi Nosson actually became a part of the Breslover sect, okay? That's a long way of saying that, that what we're going to look at here is Rabbi Nachman's actual words from his actual notebook. Now, I want you to think about this, because Reb Nosson appended this to the end of the lesson, right, to show you just how much the rabbi had everything up here, right? Because we're going to go through this. This is what Rabbi Nachman actually had written down in his notebook, and this is what he probably gave the lesson from. But the lesson that he gave was this huge lesson that Reb Nosson had written down and had printed in the Likutei Moharan before all of this, okay? So just, it's interesting that this lesson is so pivotal and so important that Reb Nosson wanted to make sure that even after the big lesson that he recorded, he actually put down what Reb Nachman actually wrote, okay, in his notebook, okay, in all of its brevity, okay? So what Reb Nachman wrote was he opened up with that quote from the Mishnah, right? That the Pirkei Avot, right? Who goes on his way alone, who stays awake at night, okay? And just a reminder that the whole quote from Pirkei Avot that Rabbi Nachman based Hitbodedut on, this idea of drawing close to God, was this phrase, right? Rabbi Chanina, the son of Chachinai, said, right, he who stays awake at night and who goes on his way alone and makes room in his heart for empty thoughts, he is liable for his own soul, right? That's the quote. So Rabbi Nachman in his notebook starts by just, stating the beginning of the quote, right? He who goes his way alone, he who stays awake at night. Okay. So Rabbi Nachman wrote, no, this is the essence of bitul. Bitul means, again, nullification or transparency, right? So this quote from the Pirkei Avot, this quote is the essence of bitul, that a person negate his corporality and become ayin, nothingness. Becoming encompassed in the oneness of God is achieved only through hitbodedut, okay? So again, this is a very brief summary of everything that we talked about for the last 2 days, right? That if you actually want to become one with God, then you have to become ayin, because God is Ein Sof, right? God is without limit, without end. So if you actually want to have any hope of, communing with God, right, and becoming encompassed in the oneness of God, you have to achieve in yourself something akin to what the divine already is. Not that you become the divine, God forbid, but you have to achieve something, right, within yourself that is similar to the essence of the divine. And if the divine is ayin, nothingness, right, and we refer to that as Ein Sof, then that means you have to achieve some sense of Ein Sofness, ayinness. And the only way you can do that is to make yourself transparent, right, to negate yourself, as it were, okay, through bitul, okay? And you do this through hitbodedut, okay, through hitbodedut, drawing close to God, pouring out your soul to God, making that connection one-on-one with the divine, okay? Now, the hitbodedut requires a special place and time so that he is not distracted by, so that he is not disturbed by distractions. And this time is night, okay? Where does he get that from? Well, again, from our Mishnah, because it says in the Mishnah, he who stays awake at night. So that's where Rabbi Nachman, of course, gets his idea that hitbodedut preferably has to be done at nighttime, okay? For then everyone is asleep, right? The place is on a secluded road, not a public road, so that he is not interrupted by people passing by. Rather, it should be specifically a road not frequently traveled. He should go there and seclude himself, okay? And that's where it says this is who goes on his way alone. This is, again, another part of the Mishnah, right? Because if he's secluded, right, then he will be able to empty his heart of all. Now, an editorial note says dross and waste, but that's not actually in the Hebrew text. Rabbi Nachman ends where he says, then he will be able to empty his heart of all, right? And that's pretty much what he says, right? That you have to empty your heart of all things, okay? And be able to attain a bitul of all corporality, Okay. Again, little editorial notes, but that's not really what's in his text, right? What's in his text is everything outside of the little brackets, okay? So that's why you have to go to this place alone, so that you're not disturbed and so that you can attain this bitul, right, of your corporality, okay? Obtaining bitul of your corporality. In other words, you need to work through all of your physical stuff and actually try to ascend to a higher spiritual level by working through all of your corporality, right? All of those things that make you corporeal, okay? And then this is what we mean by, and makes room in his heart for batala, right? For at least batala means empty thoughts or emptiness, okay? And that this, right, is where he gets the hint of bitul, because batala, right, has the same letters as bitul, bet, tet, lamed. Okay, so he's saying that yes, it says that in the Mishnah that the person is on their way alone and they make room in their hearts for batala. That doesn't mean empty thoughts as in pointless thoughts or thoughts that aren't weighty. What that means is thoughts that engender emptiness, thoughts that allow us to go beyond our corporality, right? So again, he's picking things out of the Mishnah, going deeper as to what these words could potentially mean, right? The hidden meaning of all of this, right? And then when he is entirely transparent, he is encompassed in the oneness of God. He then attains an aspect of meyuchav, okay? And meyuchav, right, means necessary, right? For the Holy One is a necessary reality, whereas all things are a contingent reality. Thus, when a person is transparent and is encompassed in his oneness, he then leaves the aspect of contingent reality and is encompassed in meyuchav reality. He's encompassed in necessary reality. And this is the aspect, right, of the ending phrase of the Mishnah. He is mitchayev for his own soul. He is mitchayev his own soul, right? Now, mitchayev means liable, okay? But liable and necessary in Hebrew have the same root, right? Tav, chet, bet, right? So therefore, when one achieves bitul, when one allows one's batala, one's thoughts of emptiness, to get them to a state where they are beyond corporality, then they achieve meyuchav, because you become mitchayev benafsho. Okay, so your soul becomes wrapped up in necessary reality, which ultimately is God. Okay, that's what Rabbi Nachman wrote. Okay, and then he gave the whole lesson, right, that we read before for the last 2 days, the 2 sessions. But that's what was actually in his notebook, right? Very concise, very direct, right? He had a very great understanding of what he wanted to say, and he didn't have to take copious notes about this, right? So these are his actual notes, okay? And again, I wanted to just bring this up just so that we could end this lesson, since we haven't been here for a few days, just going back briefly and understanding, trying to understand again what this lesson was all about, okay? Before we go on, any further questions about this idea of hitbodedut and how one actually attempts to become encompassed in God? Yes, Ari.
Can I just make I do have a question. There's the word by hainu that appears throughout, and just sort of how you were playing with the letters of batala.
Right.
It seems like there's an interesting. It's always in relation to the idea of secluding yourself, and it's a place of seclusion, and this is an idea of secluding yourself to be with God, right?
Right.
And so there's a wonderful play on letters here with hineni, which is God's announcement to Moses, here I am, and Hayinu, which is about secluding yourself, and you are to come into that here I am relation with God. So it's
very good. Rabbi Nachman would be pleased, right? Very, very good, right? No, because this is what we mean when we talk about, right? Think about the Pardes, right? The four levels of interpretation, right? The Pshat, the Pashut, the simple meaning, right? The Remes, right? The allegorical meaning, the Drash, the deeper sort of searched out meaning, and then Sod, the secret meaning, right? This is how Rabbi Nachman wants people to think about this idea of what is the secret meaning, right? That you have these words, these letters, right? And that these roots are connected somehow, right? So if it's the same shoresh as another word, well, there's got to be some type of connection between those words, right? Not just on a simple linguistic level, but on a deep philosophical level. So yes, I like that. I think Rabbi Nachman would like that as well. That when you do seclude yourself, you are embodying this aspect of hineniness, right? Because you are actually saying to God, okay, hineni, I'm here. Let's talk. Let's talk, right? Let's work something out, right? And I'm here and I'm willing and I'm open to do this. And that's the first step to becoming transparent, to achieving bitul. You have to be open to the experience of actually sitting down with the divine and hashing it out, right? You know, help me with this issue. Help me with this problem. Help me understand why. And I think Ari, you said something interesting on Friday when you said that, like, you know, this is almost like sort of a precursor in many ways to the psychoanalytic experience, except you're not on a couch with another psychoanalyst. You're right that, you know, Rabbi Nachman is saying, you know, get on the couch with God. Right, is really what he's saying, right? Because psychoanalysis is you get on the couch and you talk, right?
And then you ask them for advice, but all they do is they ask you questions. So what do you think? Like, well, I just gave you my whole
right. And in a way, but in a way, then Rabbi Nachman could be potentially hinting at for us that this is better than psychoanalysis because, you know, God is at least going to give you some type of an answer. Now you have to attune yourself to that answer. It's not that God's gonna, you know, cause your philodendron to burst into flames and talk to you, right? But you know, you will get some type of an answer from the divine the more you do this. It won't just be a series of questions, right? That this is even better than what we would think of as psychoanalysis, that, you know, you will achieve something.
Well, I think the point that I was also making is that it's a better version of psychoanalysis. Because psychoanalysis, it's almost like egocentric in the sense of you're trying to rectify something within yourself so that you can be complete within society. This takes you one step further, going beyond yourself, and you're trying to rectify something between you and something wholly other. And so it takes the same mechanisms of psychoanalysis, but it puts it on a track towards something that takes you beyond your own selfhood.
Right, because you're not just trying to make you, I mean, that is a byproduct of it, that you should be more integrated within society, but ultimately the end goal is to be encompassed in the ultimate reality of God. So therefore you go even one step beyond. Exactly. Yes, Martin.
And there's such a exquisite balance between nothing, putting yourself into nothingness, and being part of society.
Right. Well, and that's why, and again, we were talking about why this has to be on a road, because we were saying that the road in some ways represents your connection back to everything that is part of your world, right? That, in other words, if you're doing it on a road, even a secluded road, well, the road leads back to your home and your family and your community. And so you're doing this, but you're not doing this so that you can be disconnected. You're doing this ultimately so that you can return, right, and be even deeper in your connection to your community. And that's why the road is so important, because the road is the way forward and also the way back, right?
It's an amazing connection.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, good. So I just wanted to wrap this up, and I really didn't want to skip over Rabbi Nachman's actual words as reported in his notebook, because we don't get a lot of these in the Likutei Moharan. We mostly get Rabbi Nosson and his recordings of the lessons that he heard. But to actually have the words of Rabbi Nachman, even in their brevity, is very interesting. So now we're going to go into a short lesson for today, just to give us a little bit of a break from Hitbodedut before we delve back into it on Friday with a little bit more practicality of how one actually goes about it. So now we have Likutei Moharan Part 2, number 10. And that's where we're going to begin our lesson today. Yes. Oh, that would be, did I have it here? Oh, did we have? Oh, yes, there we go. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. There we go. Okay, so this lesson was given on Tisha B'Av in 1808. So this is 2 years before Rabbi Nachman dies. Okay. And so again, this is a lesson given on Tisha B'Av, and the year is 1808. Okay. So again, and this relates to Hitbodedut, because as he opens, right, the sole reason that people are distant from God and do not draw closer to him is that they lack Yeshuv Hada'at. Okay, Yeshuv Hada'at means a settled mind. So the reason why people don't engage in Hitbodedut, the reason why they do not draw closer to God, is because they lack a settled mind. Okay, so let me read Rabbi Nosson's note on this so we have a better understanding of what Yeshuv Hada'at really implies. Yeshuv Hada'at refers to a clear and composed mind. Okay, and the reason why we get this term Yeshuv Hada'at, it comes out of the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah teaches the ignorant elderly, the older they get, the more their da'at, their mind, becomes unsettled. That's the ignorant elderly. Okay, that the more they age, the more their da'at, their mind, becomes unsettled. As it is stated in Job chapter 12, verse 20. He distorts the speech of the trustworthy and deprives the elders of reason. Okay, so that's where we get this from. That if you get older and you persist in your ignorance, and you are an ignorant elder, your mind will become more and more unsettled. Okay, and that's what the ignorant elderly, but elderly Torah sages, okay, the older they get, the more settled their da'at becomes, as in, and this is again a quote from Job, the same chapter in the same verse. This is the other half of that verse. In the aged is wisdom, and in length of days, understanding. Okay, so the first half of the verse refers to if you are aging, but you are not attached to Torah, then your da'at becomes more and more unsettled as you get older. But if you are attached to Torah, then your mind, your da'at, becomes more and more settled as you age. Okay. And in another lesson in Likutei Moharan, the Rebbe teaches that the more a person's mind is settled, the greater their ability to attain unitive knowledge and awareness of God. Right? If you have an unsettled mind, you're never going to be able to contemplate and comprehend anything about the wholeness and oneness of God, and you're going to become less and less aware of the divine. Okay? And this is, of course, is in contrast to those whose da'at, like that of an elder lacking in wholeness, is never settled or clear. The concept of da'at appears throughout Rabbi Nachman's teaching. Okay, and in the English translation that we're using, right, da'at, when it is written as da'at, it most often refers to this unitive knowledge and awareness of God. Okay, so it means that when your da'at is settled, that means your mind is settled enough that you have this awareness of divinity. Okay. In other lessons, it doesn't refer so much to a level of consciousness, which is the desired goal of all spiritual development, as to the human faculty, which reasons and is responsible for one's thoughts and feelings. Okay. In this latter definition, da'at is a synonym for intellect. Okay. Or as in this lesson, the mind. Right. So the Hebrew term yeshuv hada'at means settled or composed mind. Okay. So that's what we are looking for here, right? And the reason why a person fails to engage in hitbodedut, fails to have these conversations with God, fails to work on elevating themselves to become transparent before the divine, is that one lacks a settled mind. Okay? That your intellect gets in the way, and because you're not connected to Torah, most likely in any significant way, your mind just becomes more and more agitated and unsettled as you age. Okay. So it is essential that a person strive to reflect on the purpose of all the desires and distractions of this world. This includes the desires which are bound up with the body and also the non-physical desires, such as honor. Then he will surely return to God. So why are you not achieving Yeshuv Hada'at? It's because you're not reflecting on the purpose of all the desires and distractions of the world. Okay? You're not reflecting on all of it so as to work through it and negate it. You're just allowing it to happen. You're just being carried along by the currents of the world. And you're not actually stopping to think, well, why? Why do I constantly strive for honor? Why do I constantly strive for this other emotion? Why do I constantly feel sad? Why do I constantly feel angry? Why do I constantly have this desire for money? You just get carried along by all of those emotions, and they continue to unsettle your mind. Whereas if you would start to reflect on these things, you would start the process, at least in Rabbi Nachman's ideology, of being able to dial it back and being able to sort of settle your mind. But that actually requires working through it. Why do you feel this way? Why is this important to me? Why do I allow this to do X, Y, and Z? Okay. But then here's the problem. Okay. Right. Da. However, no. Depression makes it impossible to direct the mind the way one wants. Right. Because let's face it, if we're depressed, right, if we are unhappy, then our mind just goes in any direction it wants, and we have no way to reel it in, right? Rabbi Nachman, given his history, supposedly, of depression and mental illness, understands, at least for himself, that when he feels depressed and he feels disconnected and lonely and sad, he can't control his thoughts. He can't in any way take that first step towards sitting down and saying, yeah, but why am I feeling this way? And why is this important to me? And why do I act the way I do? Right? And he realizes for himself that when he is able to achieve some type of joy in his life, he can then direct his thoughts better. Okay? And that helps him achieve this Yeshuv Hada'at. Okay? Only joy enables him to direct the mind as he pleases and attain Yeshuv Hada'at. This is because joy is the realm of freedom, as in, for through joy you will go out. Isaiah 55, chapter 55, verse 12. This is one of the Haftarot of consolation. We heard this in the last few weeks, right? This is in the Haftarah of consolation that begins, Hoy, all who are thirsty, come to the water. Right? And Isaiah talks in this about how God's word brings joy, right? And how through joy, we are able to go out, right? We are able to return to God, to go out from exile, right? And that joy allows one to go out. right? And Rabbi Nachman is relating this back to the chains of his own mind, right? That only through joy is he able to direct his mind the way he wants. Is he able to relate to God the way he wants? Is he able to relate to Torah the way he wants? When he's sad, when he's depressed, when he feels disconnected from himself and from community, it's a no-go, right? But anytime he can bring himself to joy, he can do this. And he relates this back to Torah, right? Because Isaiah says, through joy you will go out. Okay, so through joy, a person becomes free and goes out of exile. Okay, so that's the thing. Sorrow, depression isolates you. Joy connects you. Joy allows you to go out and do things, right, in the world. Okay, so what do we have to do? We have to bind the mind to joy. Because therefore, by binding the mind to joy, a person's mind and da'at are then free, and he is not completely in exile. As a result, he can direct his mind as he pleases and attain Yeshuv Hada'at, since his mind is free and not in exile. For exile unsettles the mind, right? Why do we have trouble with Yeshuv Hada'at? Because we're in exile. Right? We're in exile. We're in exile physically, and we're in exile mentally. We're in exile physically because we're outside of the land of Israel, right? We are living in exile. That is a reality, and that unsettles our mind just by virtue of the fact that we are exiles. But we're also exiles up here because then we allow depression, right, and sadness to creep into everything we do, and physical exile unsettles the mind, and then we add to that our mental sadness and depression, which then continues to unsettle the mind, okay? Because it says, for exile unsettles the mind, as our sages of blessed memory taught regarding the Ammonites and the Moabites, right? Their minds were settled because they were never exiled, as it is stated, and this is a pronouncement on Moab from the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 48, verse 11, Moab has been at ease from his youth on, and never gone into exile. Therefore, his fine flavor has remained. Okay, and so Rabbi Nachman deeply says what that means is that, right, if you are not in exile, then you're going to have it good, right? And that's why our enemies seem more settled than us, because they were never in exile, right? They were never in exile, so therefore their minds were never unsettled, and they were able to achieve things that we weren't able to achieve. And we have to get back to that, okay? We have to get back to that, right? And be able to settle our minds. And the only way for Rabbi Nachman, what he says, the only way for that is joy. Joy. Because we maybe can't do anything at the moment about the physical exile, okay? The physical exile maybe isn't happening anytime soon, right? And for most people, it may never happen, but we can do something about the mental exile, right? The mental exile can be corrected, quote unquote, through joy, okay? And how does a person achieve joy? Again, he connects this back to other lessons. The way a person achieves joy is by finding in himself at least some good point, as is explained in the verse, I will sing to God with the little I have left. So this is all the way back to that famous lesson, Azamra, right? So you need Yeshuv Da'at. You need to settle your mind. Unsettled mind comes from exile. Exile comes from depression and sadness. So we need to correct depression and sadness. How do we do that? We search for the good within ourselves and within our others, and we string them together, and that enables us to sing. And so therefore, by doing this, that's how we achieve joy. That's how we start the process of Yeshuv Hada'at, of getting a settled mind. And no matter what, a person can rejoice that he is privileged to be from the seed of Israel. So if you can't find anything else, what's your starting good point? I'm a Jew. Okay, seriously, right? That if you can't find anything else, if you truly are searching and searching and searching and searching, and you just can't find that first point of goodness with which to start your song, well, then the starting note is, hey, I'm a Jew. And that makes me happy, right? Because I should be happy that I'm a Jew. So therefore, that's my starting point. So if you're having trouble, he gives you the first step. He says, fine, I'm a Jew. Let's start there. Start with I'm a Jew, and then, right? Because we say, for not having made me a Gentile, right? We used, right, in Orthodox Sidurim, right? We say, right, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, for not making me, right, a Gentile. Now we say, right, for having made me in your image, for having made me a child of freedom, right? Right. But originally, right, the prayer was, as Rabbi Nachman knows it, thank God I'm not a Gentile, right? And so as a result of that, that can be your starting point. So if you're having trouble finding your starting point, you got to start with, I'm a Jew. Yay. Okay. Right. Okay. As we say, right, blessed is our God who created us for his glory, separated us, and gave us the Torah of truth. It is fitting that he be happy about all this and similar such things in order to gladden his mind. So first you start with, I'm a Jew, and then you start with, then you add to that, and God made me for God's glory, and God made me separate because God made me a Jew, and I have the Torah. Okay, you got at least 2 or 3 points right there. So you got the beginning of the song. Okay, you got the beginning of the song, and maybe that then will help you from there find the other good points. Okay, but I really love how the fact that he even acknowledges if you're having trouble finding the opening sparks, this is what you got to do. Okay, it's I'm a Jew, right? I'm made for God's glory, and I have the Torah, and that gives me, right? That gives me at least the beginning of the song. Okay. Okay. So, and going on, this is the meaning of a jovial mind. Okay, which comes from the Mishnah in the Talmud on Tractate Shabbat, right? That it says that on Shabbat, one is supposed to have a jovial mind on Shabbat, that you're supposed to be happy on Shabbat, right? Which is a great thing. So what's the meaning of a jovial mind, right? It refers to this binding joy to his mind and da'at, so that with the mind set free, he attains yeshuv hada'at. And also on high, a great unification is made by his being of a jovial mind. Okay, our being happy actually affects the divine, because when we're happy, especially on Shabbat, our happiness ascends up into the divine realms and creates a unification within the divine, right? And you notice how in mystical Judaism, there's always these prayers, right, that talk about, in order that the divine be unified, that the Yud Hey be unified with the Vav Hey, and that God be brought together, right? We understand on a very mystical level that our exile, our separation, all of this is somehow metaphorically and metaphysically somehow like reflected within the divine, right? So therefore, when we feel unhappy, when we feel separate, God somehow feels unhappy and separate and feels divided. And that when we, God's people, engage in certain things that allow us to draw closer to God, this actually creates within the divine a sense of union, a sense of bringing together. So our actions don't just affect this world, they actually affect the divine realm as well, right? And that's why our happiness is so important and so healing, because it heals not only us and it heals not only this world, but it actually affects some type of healing and unification within the Godhead, within the Ein Sof, within divinity, right? And that's why living a life surrounded by mitzvot, living within the paradigm of Judaism is so important, because God's love for us is so intense that what we do actually affects God, right? That again is, and we've seen this. This isn't, again, so one thing Ari and I were talking about, none of these ideas are like radical, cut out of whole cloth. They're radical in his extrapolation of them. Because in the Talmud, we have the story about God saying to the rabbi, right, give me a blessing, right? And God wants a blessing from us, right? And the rabbi thinks about it for a while and says to God, may your compassion always outweigh your anger, and may you always, right, treat your creation with compassion, right? And may you not allow your anger to overwhelm you, right? That's what the rabbi says back to God, okay? Our blessing to the divine, right? And that has an effect. So God asked the rabbi for a blessing. So the fact that our actions have some sort of great, effect on the divine isn't some radical idea. Rabbi Nachman is just taking it now to what he believes to be the logical conclusion if you extrapolate, right? If you extrapolate that story from the Talmud, then that means all of our actions have to achieve something within the Godhead, because, or else why would God ask us for a blessing in the Talmud, right? So therefore, our happiness affects God. Our sadness affects God. Our mitzvot affect the divine, right? And we become part of this, I guess, great connection, right? Where we're trying to get to the divine, we're trying to become transparent to the divine, and our actions are actually affecting, quote unquote, the divine in some way and causing this unification, which makes the union with us and the divine even more ecstatic. Ari.
What I find really interesting about this is that there seems to be this wonderful tension between the idea of exile being a bad thing and then the idea of exiling yourself into the night to be a good thing.
Yes.
And I would love it, and I have no idea if this is true, but I would love it if this lesson and teaching comes after he was exiled from his Jewish community, and this was his way of dealing with it, and it was his way of telling the community back there, saying, listen, you've actually done me a favor.
Right. Well, again, 1808. So this is toward the end of his life.
Right.
So yeah. So this was 1808. Right. Because you have to remember, Rabbi Nachman only lived until his mid-30s, his mid to late 30s. Right. He was quite young. Right. So these are quite deep thoughts, right, for someone so young. But think of the life he lived. And again, think of the fact that he's also dealing with some type of mental illness as he's going through all of this, right?
Exile is a terrible thing. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Was he able to kill himself?
Well, I think he probably would have said he was always on the derech to doing it, right? Because he has all these techniques, right? The Breslover sect is based on all of these techniques that he developed for bringing in joy, right? Now, I would like to think that, hopefully by the time he died, he at least felt he was somehow better connected to the divine. But you can see that it's a struggle within him constantly, right? But he understands that his actions have consequences, not only here, but up there, right? Quote unquote, right? And so, his journey to joy is a journey of return to the divine. And every step of that journey where he achieved something actually achieved something within divinity as well, right? So, he died so early. I think it was complications of his tuberculosis. I'm not exactly sure. I'll look at that and see exactly what is.
It almost sounds like through all of this, he's going through much as I said, psychoanalysis on himself to improve himself, get better.
Yeah.
Through all of it.
Through all of this, yeah. And I think that's a big part of it, that even though he doesn't have that term, and we're not going to have that term for a while, right? He's doing a lot of introspection. And he's made an art form of it, and he's giving us tools as to how Judaism can actually help us do it. Right. And the interesting thing is that Judaism is supposed to help us do it by doing all of these external things as well, because we're supposed to do the mitzvot, and we're supposed to be involved in community, and we're supposed to do all these things that connect us outward. But then we also have to have this inward time with God as well. Right. And it seems like what he's hinting at is that achieving that beautiful balance between the outward things Judaism asks you to do and the inward things that are hinted at in all of our scripture and rabbinic literature, that you can actually achieve that balance of actually having a really deep relationship with divinity. Right? It's to me, again, it's fascinating, right? And again, this whole idea of a settled mind, right? And that settled mind comes through joy. And the more disconnected we feel, the more unhappy we feel, the more sad we feel, right? The more our minds won't do what we want our minds to do, right? That's a pretty deep insight for someone in his 30s. I mean, if you think about it, that's a pretty deep insight for someone in his 30s. And I think all of us, as we do age, can attest to that, that when we are in times of unhappiness and anger and things like that, we just can't get our minds back on the path, right? But that if we can connect to something joyful and give our minds a chance to calm down, we can actually get back on the path, right? And then, of course, you get back on the path, and then you find your quiet, secluded space, and then you start talking with God. And it's not that you don't have setbacks, right? Rabbi Nachman acknowledges that all of these things are extraordinarily difficult to do, and you have setbacks and you have goals, but you have to constantly be doing it. Okay? So 4 minutes to 9. This was just a little breather of a lesson. And when we get together on Friday, we're actually going to look at one of his guides to Hitbodedut, because we talked about why you should do it, where you should do it. We haven't really talked about what you're supposed to do. Okay, so then he has a guide about what you're actually supposed to do in terms of Hitbodedut. And then after that, we're going to take the last either week, if it takes us only one day, if not the last 2 days, if we're still looking at the guide to Hitbodedut on Monday. And we're going to look at one of his lessons that has within it his very famous phrase about the world and the narrow bridge and not being afraid, because we all know that phrase from Rabbi Nachman, but we know it wrong, right? Read my article in the Alberta Jewish News to get a little taste of it, because I explain a little bit about what's wrong about how we know that phrase in my article on in the Alberta Jewish News. But with all of that, thank you all for the lesson today, and we'll be going into services now, and we'll see everyone on Friday morning at 8:10. Have a great couple days.
You know what I was thinking as you were saying,